Hi everyone, you're very welcome to today's webinar, the second webinar series. We're joined by Patrick Hunt today, Gardening and Biodiversity Specialist of Patrick Hunt Gardening. So we're delighted to have Patrick with us today, bringing a different perspective to our series and the theme of resilience. The COVID-19 pandemic has really shown us how changes in our behaviour can allow nature to thrive again, and the importance of working with nature and protecting our environment. We know that strong biodiversity and preserving nature and wild spaces can help protect us against future outbreaks of epidemics and pandemics by preventing the quick spread of diseases from wild animals to humans. So it's a really interesting point in time to delve more into the role that nature education plays in our current education systems. So we have Patrick joining us today, who's going to be talking about his work with schools and communities and the gardening workshops that he's been running with children to build their knowledge and skills of gardening and nature education. Patrick has a background in architecture and moved into gardening and nature education in recent years and has been running these workshops for the last 5 years. Obviously, we're at an interesting point in time with him now with COVID, but he's extensive experience in it, so we're delighted to hear from him today on it. And he's a keen interest in sustainable gardening methods as well, utilising drought-tolerant plants and no-dig and permaculture methods. And in recent years, he has also branched out into gardening design. So if you're thinking of getting your garden done, Patrick could be the man for you. He runs online consultations as well, so something to keep in mind in the background. So we're delighted to hear from Patrick today. So I'll pass over to you, and thanks very much, guys. Enjoy the webinar.
Cheers. Thanks very much, Emma, and hello, everybody. I'll just share screen now, so hopefully this will work out. Okay, so as Emma introduced me there, my name is Patrick Hunt, and for about 5 years I've been working in schools. And the nature of the work is that I visit the school and we have a team. It could be looking at hedgerows, it could be pond dipping, it could be planting. And over the 5 years, I've worked at about 50 different schools, usually on a repeat basis. So I go back to the same school a number of times during the year, maybe 5 or 6 times. And you build a relationship with both the staff and the students, and you get to know the school, you get to know how things work and what's possible with the school. So just move through. This is just a quick pick of the website and just kind of covers the stuff I do. So I run gardening courses, as Emma said. I also do with a garden design and consultancy, and I do workshops for schools and community groups. I feel with schools and in terms of education that as well as educating the kids or working with the kids, I think it's very important for people to work or go in and do workshops for the staff. So for the last couple of years, I've done summer courses, teacher summer courses, 5-day courses in Kildare and in Dublin for school teachers. So with a picture here of some teachers from a variety of different schools in Kildare and Dublin, and we're out dipping in a river on the Liffey, actually, in Bellamore Eustace. So, you know, if the teachers come along to a workshop like this and they see the value of what's in the river, you know, very much at the start, they might think, well, up there's nothing to see. And by the end of the session, they realize that this is a good thing for maybe their students to do. So very often then they'll be, you know, prepared to get a bus and to go on a trip like this with their own class, because they see the educational value. And then in the schools, very often one of the simplest things I do with the kids is just bring them on a local nature walk. So, you know, start by looking at what's on the school door, so to speak. So avoiding expenses of buses, maybe just take the school kids out and around to have a look at what's in a hedgerow. And you might be thinking, well, what can you glean or learn from a hedgerow other than, you know, different types of trees and weeds and wildflowers? But what I often do with the school children who maybe have a garden is show them the structure and the way that the hedgerow is actually structured, and think then about how you might learn from that structure or design, so to speak, to use that in your own gardening designs. So for example, with a hedgerow, you have what's called stacking, where, for example, in that picture there, you might have a large tree or a bush, say it could be an elderberry, and then under that you might have something like nettles, and then on a ground cover level you might have wildflowers woodland strawberries, things like that. So what that can teach kids, what that can teach anyone, is that, you know, maybe in your own garden design, you might sort of think of it as a little woodland, except maybe change the plants. So instead of the tree being an elder bush or a birch tree or hazel or oak, maybe you'd put in an apple tree, and then that would be your canopy layer in terms of your design. And we've done this in schools. We kind of use this idea. And then below that, then you might have your fruit bushes. So that's kind of taking on a shrub layer. And then below that, again, you have your ground cover layer, which could be strawberries. So just by changing out the plants, you can use that design of what's already there in nature and sort of copy or mimic it. It's biomimicry, I suppose, would be the name for that. Then other things then we do in schools is I'd sometimes maybe hand out these cards, these little pictures to the class. Everyone gets one. And on those pictures are, I suppose, the elements or the ideas that you might try to include in a school garden. You know, so just as a way to get the children thinking, what do they know about a pond? What could they tell about a bird box? Do they know anything about wildflowers? So each child would get a card like that, and they might sort of just give us 3 or 4 lines what they think. And then very often I'd get the kids to come up and maybe place some of these elements that might be included in a design around a picture of the school. And we often would think then about how we would group the elements in terms of, for example, if you had a pond, would it make sense to put maybe a meadow near the pond so that frogs would get into the meadow to look for slugs, and that by grouping those elements, you can then come to a sort of design. And the children love this because it opens up a dialogue and a conversation with them in class, and it gets them thinking about aspects of gardening and biodiversity and the connections between the garden, the wildflowers, and the flowers in their garden, the wildflowers in the hedgerow, and connecting it all up for their school building. So this was a picture I took actually very recently in Cabinteely Park, a very good park in Dublin, where it's been designed with biodiversity, obviously recreational purposes, uses like that, but it's been very much designed as well for play and just to create this sense of wonder for children. And this is a stream that runs into the pond in the park. The pond would be in the foreground behind where we're sitting here. But this little stream runs down through, and what they've created is just a little wider, deeper section on the stream and a few stepping stones. And when I was there, I was keen. There was a few children going over that direction, having a picture of them here, GDPR, but just the sense that someone had the idea to put stones across that, and I saw a couple of children skipping across it. So on one level, it gets the children, off the main path and down across this stepping stones here. But also the way that they've dealt with this stream, they've actually done it really, really interestingly. For example, the mown grass either side, left and right. On the left, there's a meadow with a track on the right-hand side of it to allow for access. And on the right, you have an area for sitting. If you think about, for example, a farm where a farm might have a stream as part of the land, and the runoff from slurry spreading and that might go down directly into the stream. Here we have an example of how any runoff that might be coming off of the grass or from mowing or from any chemicals that are used on the land is captured or stored within this wilder area, and the water then as a result is cleaned. So depending on the width of this strip they've created here, you can make that narrower or wider. And I just put this in because I think this is a very good example of how you can do a lot of things within the design. You can have a sense of play, you can create something for biodiversity, but also the design can actually capture and store any toxins that might be in the environment. And it's these sort of observations that I like to make to then show schools how they can deal with particular situations. I do quite a lot of consultation where I'd visit a school and help them to figure out the best sort of design solution for their own particular site. This is an example of a design I did for an article for the In Touch magazine. It's the school teachers magazine that came out in June. And what it shows, I suppose, is how you might group those elements I showed in a previous slide, and how that then might turn into a design solution for a school. So having worked with kids in gardens for 5 years, I've yet to come across a designed school garden that actually works. Most of the gardens that may have even been done by architects, I've seen all sorts of fancy designs, but for whatever reason, they haven't considered what happens when you put 30 children in to that particular space. So you have to be, you know, thinking about how the children work and move within that space. So in this design here, we see elements like the food forest on the left-hand side. You've got the stacking of fruit trees with your shrubs and your fruit underneath that. Then we have 6 large raised beds, one for each year group. And basically, I have a whole design that goes with this as well, where each class has different tasks for different months of the year to do with their raised bed for their vegetable growing, but also tasks as well as they move through the school. As each year moves through the school, they get to do things from sowing wildflower seeds to, you know, planting sensory plants to, you know, cutting back and maintaining fruit. And as the children go through the school, they take on tasks that, you know, require more and more dexterity. You wouldn't get a small child, you know, sowing carrot seeds, for example, because they'd blow in the wind, where it's easier for a smaller person to plant potatoes. So it's all these sort of little things and tricks that I've sort of observed or learned over the years. That's actually available online if anyone wanted to read that article. It's the June edition of In Touch magazine. This then is an example of a school design I did in Ballantyre Boys and Girls School. There was a previous architect designed, even though I'm an architect myself, there was a previous architect design drawing for it, but it was known as the Graves, where the raised beds were arranged in a sort of spiral shape with very narrow paths between the beds, so much so that the grass couldn't be cut by the mower and it wasn't possible to actually maintain it. And as a result of that, then within 2 years, the whole thing became overgrown. So we went in and we cleared it. I have a preference for gravel between paths because it just makes it easier for access during the winter time. And then having beds at different heights as well, so that if there's any mobility issues and that maybe, you know, thinking of children who might be in wheelchairs, how can they get access to the garden too? One of the things I'm very keen on in gardening is the idea of the types of plants you're using, and using things that are drought tolerant, don't require planting each year. So I'm definitely not interested in bedding plants that you pop in each year. Things that are perennial, and allowing those plants then to stand over the winter, so that insects can overwinter, say earwigs, beetles and that larva can actually use the stalks and stems, the hollow stems, to actually survive. This is a picture I took in my own garden this morning about 7 o'clock, I think, maybe 6:30, just as the sun was coming up. And I suppose it gives you the idea of sensory plants. Small children very much like colour, but they also like sensory plants, and schools are very keen to put sort of a sense of sensory into their gardens. Now, you could argue that all plants are you know, have some aspect of any sense, but I think grasses in particular, in terms of, you know, visual impact and the way light can travel through them, and that the touch and feel of them are really important in school gardens. So it's this style of planting, this sort of airy, see-through, grassy sort of planting with perennials, herbaceous perennials that come back year after year, that I think are good value for schools and good value for anyone who's looking to garden. And just at the bottom there, I've just said how the plants are low maintenance. They're quite efficient in terms of water usage, and they provide a habitat as well. This is another part of my garden there this morning, the front. It's a combination of Astrantia, that's the purple, pinky purple flower, with Artemisia Powys Castle. And those, again, nice soft smelling plants. Children really like those. This is Selenum willishianum, another sensory plant that, again, is good for schools. I'll just move on a little bit there. My time is very short. So yeah, one of the things that I find with school gardening is that very often the school will ask me to come in, and when the children come to gardening, what they're really doing is just the very last bit, where everything's been done in terms of beds have been built, the soil has been filled in the beds, and really the children are not doing or not getting a full experience. So I often would ask maybe a school I'm working with to let the children be part of the process right from the start. So you know, maybe the first meeting we'd sit down and talk about what types of food, vegetables they like to grow, what sort of flowers they already know of, and they'd have an input into design. And then it's really interesting because children are capable of amazing things. This class here actually built those beds, and when I went to this school, some of the beds were located in under trees, near Lelandy hedging. So the roots had grown into the beds. So one of the first things we did was we actually moved the timber beds. So the children dug out all the soil and compost that's in them at one side, moved the beds, and then refilled it. And within 2 hours, the different classes had done this and literally moved up the tons of soil. So, you know, even for the children to see that process is very important, because in later life, when it comes to actually having that interaction with their own gardens, they'll realize actually it's not a thing that you have to get someone else from the outside to come in and do. So very much, I think it's the school children's garden, and when I visit a school, I try to do as little as possible. I'm more of a kind of a director or organizer, and I kind of put them in groups and get them working in teams. And that's another aspect as well, is this idea that group work, and in terms of resilience, how can you figure out how to solve a problem if there's something needs moving, or if there's, you know, plants need positioning, or how big will they get, what sort of spacings are between them. All of these things require the use of maths and planning and group work, and the children really respond well to that. And very much, I'd often let them try something out and make lots of mistakes, and you know, just keep asking them a question or send them away to try something else until they figure it out for themselves, because they really get a lot from that. Other things then I do in schools would be bird watching. How much time now? Yeah, so bird watching is very good activity to do in schools. Again, you're interacting with nature on your doorstep. So a simple thing would be for a school to put a feeder up outside a classroom window, and then inside the window a chart with 20 of the top garden birds. I have some of these charts done up myself. And what you find then is that children, without realizing it, are interested in learning all about the birds that are coming to the feeders, colours and so on and so forth. And then we go on local nature walks at different times of the year to see various species. The other thing as well, getting back to briefly the abilities of kids, these are very young children, senior infants, first class, and we planted 50 trees, and in small groups they take turns trying out shovels and spades and trowels and whatever method they can think of to dig the hole to plant the trees. And you know, 20 minutes, half an hour working away planting a tree is really good fun for small children. The type of stuff I do quite a lot of, and bug hotels as well. We've done quite a few of those in inner city schools where there's small courtyards. Try to make the most of what's available. Other things then, like mini beast hunts, they're really, really good for kids. So really oftentimes it's just giving the child a permission to go and get dirty and get mud on their hands, because very often in schools it's all about staying clean and not doing these things. And very often the resistance is getting the teacher on board, because if they're showing kind of reluctance to get involved and to do these things, then some children, not all, pick up on that. But what I find is after maybe half an hour of doing an activity like this, everyone gets on board, which is really good. Simple things then, like I have an article out actually in this month's INTO magazine on creating hedgerows and creating connections with existing wildlife corridors. So the idea of planting more hedgerows in schools and allowing ground covers of ivy. Here we have a mistle thrush bird in school, and just simple things like that. Not mowing the grass very often or as often is also another way to connect with nature. And then as well, connecting with very young children. Young children love to make little seed balls, adding mud with seeds to create little wildflower patches. So creating a little simple pallet kitchen, mud kitchen is a nice idea for them. This is something that's in Harold's Cross National School. So I don't know if we have time for this. How are we doing there now? Oh yeah, I'm gone a little bit over. I'll finish up pretty quickly. So there's a couple of different types of wildflower meadows. There's a colourful annual wildflower meadow, which a lot of people really want. And when they say meadow, this is what they're thinking of. This is Cabinteely Park. Then there's an actual wildflower meadow where it's less colourful, especially in the second, third year. And the maintenance for something like this is simple as just cutting a grass tract through it. So places like this in schools, you know, could easily be done. And I'm always trying to promote this type of thing in schools. Less consumption of fuel, less mowing, things like that, and to try and get a diversity of species in it. Using a plant called yellow rattle, you can actually create a meadow without any need for taking off the topsod or any skimming or anything like that. So there are ways of doing it that are less invasive than what you might think. Anyone who's looked into meadow making. And then other things like sensory plants. Again, this is Cabinteely Park, and ideas for types of sensory plants. The grass in the foreground is Campsia. It's got a lovely airiness through it, and just creating block planting of things like Agastache and Rudbeckia and Brodskis and Calamagrostis and different grasses creates a lovely sort of sensory feel for schools. There just isn't enough of this in schools. It's often very much the space left over after design is what I consider most school gardens, where there's a little north-facing shady spot where a garden's shoved in until eventually that space is needed for a porta cabin for another extra classroom. So it's really something that should be designed right at the start of the process. So yeah, that's me done. My website's patrickhuntgardening.com, and if you have any questions, that's it. So short and sweet. I'll hand back to you there, Emma. So
thanks very much, Patrick. That was really fascinating insight. Thank you for the tour of it. I feel like we could definitely have you talking for an hour there to learn a lot more from you and glean a lot more knowledge. But thank you so much for it. It's really interesting to hear about your work. Do we have any questions there, guys? I think oh, just someone has said brilliant. Thanks, Patrick, from Dermot Moran. So thank you for that feedback, Dermot. Do you have any questions there, guys? I'm so happy to give you a moment to formulate your thoughts. Maybe actually one for myself initially to start us off. Just actually on your last point there, what you were saying, Patrick, about that sometimes gardens get kind of almost like an afterthought, and the importance of building from the start. Do you see in recent years like more of an interest and appetite for that to kind of happen, say if it's any kind of new designs of schools? Like, are you ever contacted where people want to actually incorporate it more from the beginning, or is it kind of still that sort of trying to work with?
I'm not contacted by the Department of Education. So if there's a new school being built, or if there's an extension or a change to an existing school, generally what happens is the plans are sent out to the staff room, and I've often gone into staff rooms where I've been in that school for a number of years, and suddenly there's a new design up on the wall. Okay. So I'm not sure what consultation process happens between staff in the school and the department. It's more than likely the principal at that level. But I've been in schools where, you know, they had a beautiful hedgerow and an amazing resource in terms of bird watching. And the new design that was going to be brought in a couple of years' time, basically they were going to remove the best bit of biodiversity in the school. And I mean, there were ways around it. It could have been, but what it was, unfortunately, it's generic design. What's happening. What's coming from the department is generic. It's not designed. It's not designed with, I suppose, a very thorough analysis of what's on site, and to try and make this not moment. And I wish it was. I'd love someone like that for architects design schools would ring me and say, oh yeah, could you come out and have a look and give us your 2p about what you do. But no, at the moment it's
need more of a mindset change kind of around it.
It's not my experience at the moment. No.
Well, thank you for that feedback, Patrick. We have just more feedback from Rob saying fascinating, thanks. So thank you for that, Rob. Just actually on the, there may be one more question actually before I continue on again. Okay, so we have one from Gregory Friston. So Gregory, I'll just put you on audio there. So if you want to ask a question to Patrick. Okay, you should be able to talk there now, Gregory.
Hello. I was wondering whether you find a challenge to be able to get the native species of flowers, plants put in that the insects, that the native insects will use, and whether people are readily open to using blocks of plants that also will attract in the pollinators. Mixing them up.
There's the two points there. Yeah, so in terms of natives, very often schools already have native species on their grounds, and they refer to them as weeds. So my role is very often to re-educate them that the word weed now changes to wildflower, and just to make them aware of what they already have. So in terms of natives and introducing natives, I would be very much of mind of introducing an area of meadow. Very often those schools will show me their meadow, and it'll be in the shade in under trees, and it's not possible to grow meadow in those conditions. So I'll sort of advise them on where to position it as best possible. And very much in terms of natives, it's about showing them what they already had. I mean, for example, I was in a school up in Stillorgan, so Santrasa, and last year we found bee orchids in the lawn. Now, I mean, anywhere that had bee orchids should be allowing that meadow to develop. And we looked more closely at the grass, and there was yarrow, there was all sorts of wildflowers. There was about 20 species of wildflowers that you would actually pay, you know, to have put in, and it was already there. All they had to do was allow the grass to grow. So there's a massive, and I mean massive, job of education in terms of managing the grounds of a school, in terms of promoting wildflowers and natives. And then on the other point then, the idea of block planting, it's expensive. So again, very much like that picture there was something that I feel in any school you can have areas for natives, absolutely you have to have that, but everyone wants that sort of colourful, perennial, prairie style thing, you know, that sensory garden, and that's generally ornamentals in terms of its composition. The main problem is budget. It's not that there's an unwillingness to do it, it's just budget, because these plants are expensive. Now, you planning, and that's an issue as well. There's many challenges in schools, believe me. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Patrick. We have one here from Yan Ling, so maybe I'll just actually read that out. So, hi Patrick, have you done any projects for senior community? How can we use gardening to bring a diverse group of community together?
When you say senior community, do you mean senior schools, is that, or is that like senior citizens? I'm not quite sure.
Yes, that is a fair point indeed. I might just put you on audio there, Yan Ling, and then you'll be able to explain the question. Okay, you should be able to speak there now, Yan Ling. Thanks.
Hi.
How you doing?
I meant the senior citizens, the elders.
Yeah. No, I haven't done any work for senior citizens groups. I'm more than happy to do that, but at the moment I haven't done that. I mean, you know, all of this stuff is universal. It applies regardless of age group, and very much my workshops, the only thing I adapt is the language and the terminology that I use to work with the age appropriateness of the person I'm talking to. So, and the depth, you know, in terms of what you're discussing. So if it's senior citizen, I mean, they could have a really in-depth, I suppose, you know, a desire to learn about these things. So, I mean, if there are groups out there, absolutely, I'd be delighted to work with them. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there is a place where on the left-hand side is the OH home, on the right-hand side is a childcare center. The land is empty, so we're just wondering whether what you did sort of inspired me. I wonder whether we could do a common activity, and gardening seems to make a lot of sense now.
Yeah.
Well, Yan Ling, maybe I can put possibly the two of you in touch, maybe separately, and if you'd like to maybe start that conversation, I can connect you after the webinar if Patrick's open for that. And so,
that's good.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thanks for that. That's great.
Thanks very much, then, Yan Ling. We have just a comment here from Dr. Ekraj Ocha, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, saying biodiversity and ecosystems are major components in the module in sustainable development that I've been teaching at postgraduate level, and I found this presentation very interesting and supplemental. So thanks very much to you, Patrick, for it. And one question here from Gideon Vanderberg. Have you had much call for designing filtering cleaning beds in order to clean grey water?
No, but I was down in Wells House in Wexford there last week, and they're putting in a massive system like that, a 6-pond system to deal with their wastewater. I haven't had any involvement with the actual design of the sizing and all of that side of things. No, but my involvement there is in terms of integrating that with their desire to develop kind of an offering for school groups to go there. So developing kind of pathways and bird hides and things like that. So I'm going to be going down there again soon, hopefully, when the drawings have been produced. I'm not sure what company are doing it, but yeah, I am involved, but not in the sort of technical side of it. That wouldn't be my training, no.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Patrick. And I think one final one here from Dermot Moran. I'm just asking, what was the plant that made the meadow without the digging in? If that makes sense.
The plant is called yellow rattle, and it's known as the Meadow Maker. So there's many ways of making a meadow. If you look on irishwildflowers.ie, Sandro Cafulla, he sells native wildflower seeds, and you can go down that route where you spray off using chemicals, spray off the existing number of times, or skim off the soil to lower fertility, and then you put your mix down. Or there's another way to do it, which is where you cut the grass very short in September and October. You then put yellow rattle down on the grass, and then you might find a way to tread it in. So traditionally animals, their hooves would have treaded it into the ground. And then in the spring, it comes up usually by about middle of March, you'll see it coming up. And what it does is it semi-parasitizes the grass. So on the roots of yellow rattle, there are things called hostora. So instead of the grasses growing really tall, they get less tall over time. And that opens up the sward, allowing other wildflowers that are already existing in the seed bank to actually grow. So instead of introducing species, what you're trying to do is allow what's already there to come on. And what you can do then, in addition to that, is you can then grow and plug in plants each autumn. So say, for example, if you wanted to introduce meadowsweet or knapweeds or something like that that weren't there in the seed bank, and you would see they're not there over a period of time, you could then grow those on in pots and plug them in as, 9 centimeter or 1 liter pots. And then once they drop seeds, they'll start to spread over time. So that's my approach. It's less expensive because you don't have to remove soil, and it's quite effective as well. And there are a number of other plants as well you can use to parasitize grass. Another one is red bartsia, yellow bartsia, and another one called eyebright. So there's 4 that are good in grassland to help reduce competition from grasses.
Brilliant. Fantastic, Patrick. Like a hive of knowledge there, a fountain of knowledge. We'll definitely be kind of compiling all that. It's brilliant to know all of this. Well, if we don't have any last questions from our attendees there, then we might wrap up. So a huge thanks to Patrick for joining us today and giving us an insight into his work and approach with pupils. We look forward to keeping in touch with you and hearing about your progress with schools. And hopefully, as you say, there will start to maybe be a mindset shift in terms of realizing the importance of building in the design from the start and prioritizing it as opposed to it coming second, and increased appreciation of the importance of diversity. So huge thanks to Patrick, and thank you all for joining us. We will be back next week with Martin Schildkamp, who is the founder and director of SmartNet, and he'll be discussing SmartNet's approach to non-engineered construction of earthquake resilient structures, and to improve the seismic behavior of the structures and their experience working with countries around the world. So we look forward to hopefully having some of you, if not all of you, maybe back with us then for obviously a very different webinar, but another interesting perspective on the theme of resilience. So thanks very much again to Patrick, and have a good afternoon or evening wherever you are based in the world, guys. Thanks now. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.